This conference will now be recorded.
Wonderful. It is 12:02 p.m. Eastern Time, and the Clean Heat Standard Equity Advisory Group subgroup on equity frameworks has requisite members to begin, and so we shall. I will start off by saying welcome. Thank you everybody for being here. I will be facilitating this meeting. Our usual facilitator, Ashira, had a medical emergency over the weekend and is out until further notice. I facilitated the group this morning. We'll be facilitating this group today, and then tomorrow we'll have Catherine Morris from the CBI facilitating with my support. I will also be performing the organizational tasks that Shira had been performing until she is able to resume. That means myself and Mia will be putting together the materials and getting anything ready. So anything that you usually send to Ashira, please send my way. Also, because I am here primarily as a facilitator, I will do my best to inject myself only for those reasons and not, represent the PUC's perspective too much. If there are direct questions, I will do my best to answer them, of course. But my role here will be to help this group achieve its aim. I will note that I am not a professional facilitator, so I will do my best to help this all happen, but group members, please, push back, make requests as you see necessary to get this work done. What the work is, the charge from the full group was to further refine the framework that was developed at the last meeting, presented to the full group, and here we are to refine it. And I will add two questions from the PUC's perspective that we wanted to transmit to this group. The first is asking the question, how should this tool be used? And asking the question, is it going to be granular enough to evaluate individual policy decisions? If it is, we'll absolutely use it to help make policy decisions. And then we would also like to pose the question, how would this group or the equity advisory group as a whole gathering the information necessary to answer the questions that are asked by this framework? With that, I want to step back a little bit and open up for discussion by the group members. I do have a Google Doc that we can use to collaboratively edit during this meeting if that it is something that the group members would like to do. So with that, let's refine this framework.
So to your last part, yes, I think a group editing document would be helpful.
Alrighty, I'll put that on screen and then share link with the group.
And to your other questions, I hope and expect that this rubric will be used for each potential eligible measure, as well as maybe other policy decisions regarding the clean heat standard. I think it's not yet ready for use. There needs to be clear instructions about how it is used. But I hope it's granular enough or specific enough to be used for anything that goes before the board or the Public Utility Commission, or perhaps even the designated delivery agent if they're going to make decisions independent of the PUC.
Yeah, I agree, Pike. I think a couple things about it and creating it. I believe we came up with a lot of different questions that cover a lot of different equity aspects. And my vision of it would that it would be used to create a lens through which certain actions would be seen. So questions that might not immediately come to mind when you're looking at a certain action or clean heat standard, the questions would help guide a perspective that would include many different communities, many different socioeconomic groups so that the lens was wide enough to include thought about how any specific action would affect many different people.
I'm interested in group members' perspective on the best way to start digging into this document. I know there was a specific direction from the full group last week to correct some language. I am changing the general use of the term measure to the general use of the term action. So we can start off by going through there. And then also interested in group members' perspective or approach on how these questions can be applied differently to different situations. It is a very different situation for someone interested in installing a clean heat measure in their home to answer these questions for themselves, and the PUC to be thinking of these questions as we make policy decisions. So as we go throughout, I think it would be useful for the group to consider and possibly instruct how different entities should use this framework.
Yeah, I think it would be good not to see it as restrictive. I think there could be certain questions that may not apply to certain situations. I think the beauty of it is it can guide conversation, as we talked a little bit about having a straw vote or having something before a vote was actually taken on an action. And I think some of these actions are very complicated. So I think this allows people to take a certain question, spend some time on it, not have to react directly, and then come back with their gut feelings on where it might come. I think there was a 1 to 4. There's a rating on each question, so we might have to change the format so that it's easy to fill out. I think that way people can think about it outside, come back to a discussion, having thought through all these many aspects, and use their scoring as a point of discussion.
I am hearing that one of the good uses for this might be as an evaluation guide as people are going through and assessing different possibilities so that they have a framework with which to approach a problem. Is that accurate?
I think so.
Okay.
And I would agree with that, Jen. I think that's what I was envisioning as well. And I think by changing the word, from clean heat measure to action, it does make it more applicable to multiple different, instances of or circumstances. Yeah. So, and I think it was also just mentioned that, some of these questions are not going to apply to different scenarios. So they can simply be, you know, essentially skipped over, or I think if filling out the rubric could say not applicable in this situation, which I think would be totally acceptable, and answer the ones that are applicable, especially if it said action. It's more of a broad term and can be used in multiple cases. So
I think in the original form that came out of Austin, there was also a note that if something ended up in a negative column, that wasn't acceptable. So in some way, it gives a lens to make sure that an action isn't coming forth that would negatively affect somebody. I think is a really important thing to talk about any action.
I would agree. I think that's crucial, because if it's negatively, really, if anything on this list is, it's going to negatively impact a group, like, that is a great kind of safety switch, if you will, to kind of build into this, where it's like, if there is a negative outcome, then there needs to be some discussion and, investigation into why that is. And I think that's exactly what we want to get from this rubric is we want to know where there are gaps and areas where groups are being negatively impacted, if that's the case. And so I think this is the way I see it. The rubric can be used to evaluate how beneficial an action might be or how detrimental an action might be. And then that will, then spur further action. If it is in the negative column, it needs to be reconsidered. So I think that's kind of exactly what we want to come from this piece of this rubric. So
yeah, for each action, I imagined that perhaps the designated delivery agent or an obligated party that's installing a clean heat measure for each of the proposed measures or actions, they would fill out this rubric and submit it to whatever party is going to allocate the clean heat credits so that it is part of the submission process for receiving clean heat credits. That's how I envisioned it.
Yep, and I think that as it's written now, my understanding is that would most likely be the Department of Public Service is doing the verification of the credits. So that's a great point. I think this would be submitted essentially in the application or to receive credit essentially as part of. You need to. I think it could be used as sort of like a proof that like this rubric has been considered essentially.
And
also,
certainly
I
I
think.
see it. Go ahead, Ben.
I was just gonna kind of keep talking. You go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that could be a way it's used down the road, but I think initially it'll be very helpful for the discussions of our equity group. And for the PUC to use it, I think the more people that are asked to fill something like this out, the different stakeholders, different communities, the more information we can get for input on creating the actions and the plan itself.
Yep, that's pretty much what I was going to say. Yeah, and I don't want to. I also wanted to clarify in what I just said. I don't want to imply that for every single credit or creditable measure that this needs to be completed. That would be quite the burden. But I think at the outset, for sure, when there is a process for when a new measure can be considered to be included in a clean heat measure or so like if a new technology comes online, for example, new type of heat pump, there's going to be a process by which it's assessed as to whether or not that is eligible for clean heat measures. At that point, I think this rubric could be used in that case. And then from then on out, for example, air source heat pumps, initially this rubric should be utilized to ensure that kind of all facets of equity are thought of, within that specific measure. Or we're going to change it to action. I think because it's not just measures, of course, that we're talking about. Throughout the rulemaking process, this should be used for any major new, pieces that are or pieces of basically the policy making process throughout the, as we make new policy related to the clean heat standard. I think this is a key tool to ensuring that what is being put out there is equitable. So I completely agree. I think it's really right now we're focused on kind of the initiation of the outset, basically laying the foundation for an equitable policy. Didn't want to imply that this is for every credit that needs to be approved.
I would like to imply that very thing. I think it should be for every credit. For example, not all heat pumps are the same. A heat pump that's installed that's going to be primarily used as air conditioning system and does not replace a gas boiler or gas furnace is not a clean heat measure. So I think if there is a clean heat credit that is funneling through the system, this rubric should be attached to that clean heat credit.
Yeah, I mean, I'd see where you're coming from for sure. See, I envision it, the example you just gave with the air conditioning, an obligated party, for example, is going to be, um, one of the things that they were going to need to know is, fuel usage of if you're going to install a heat pump at a home, the fuel that's being consumed at the house before the measure is installed is going to be known. Um, but yeah, I think I guess where I'm coming at from from the department's position on that, I think that could be administratively burdensome, um, to have, because we're talking presumably about potentially thousands of credits a year, so there would be essentially thousands of rubrics to review for every single measure. Could be administratively burdensome, uh, from the department's perspective. Um, I see what you're getting at for sure, and I do like the train of thought there, because really the point of this is to ensure equity and ensure that the measures that are being installed are following these guidelines. But I wonder if there is I was again was envisioning this for a category of credits, for air source heat pumps broadly, but for each individual instance of installation that could be quite a workload. Um,
Yeah, I have to
but
agree with Ben. I think the beauty of this is that many people would be filling out the rubric, not just one person or the applicant. But I do think it would be very useful for procedures like you're talking about, Pike, which is, what kind of certification is a contractor going to have? What kind of um, information are they going to have before they recommend a certain clean heat measure? Are they going to have to know what heat was being used beforehand, what the income is, all those kinds of procedural things? I think this rubric can help us make that very granular. And then if those equitable procedures are applied, then each application can be checked to see that those procedures are being applied, and that will make it equitable. Um, but not each specific one person filling out, because I think the beauty is that a lot of people will be weighing in on these questions for a consensus of what kind of procedures would be equitable.
right, I think that's well said, Jen. Um, it would be kind of a standard like an SOP, standard operating procedure for equity related to this measure. Because I guess from my personal experience, I've having been a person installing a measure, a heat pump, etc. I think what we want to avoid, while the intention again is good to have someone fill out this rubric for every installed measure, in practice, on the ground reality is that if you have a weatherization crew or a heat pump installer, my fear is that if this was a requirement to getting credit for that measure, it would be filled out very hastily and without as much thought to it. It would be like this checklist that needs to be done, and it's like circle all the boxes kind of thing. Um, so and there would be potentially little oversight as to who is checking that work. If it's one individual that's just checking yes to everything. So I think having it at the outset where it's a more concerted effort to really thoughtfully review the process, look over this rubric, and then lay out that framework by which these measures should be installed, I think is what I envision as the goal. Yeah, so pretty much what you just said, Jen. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Um,
I'll ask the group, given this discussion, We have therefore the Equity Advisory Group offers this rubric too, and I see this section as the 4 intended uses of this rubric. Given this conversation, how can we refine or clarify these 4 uses? And I understand we're not totally in agreement here yet, but I just want to move in that direction.
I think I'd like to use Ben's standard operating procedure. Maybe somewhere it could be help to refine the procedures that would be used for each action to take place. For instance, maybe what certification someone has to have, what the idea of what income levels met, low income, all those types of things that would be important information to have before something went forward that we feel would make it more equitable in the completion of the action.
Right, sort of included as kind of the initiate, like the packet, right, like SOP. If there is a new clean heat measure that is, an emerging technology, for example, this would need to be part of the process by which that new emerging technology becomes an official clean heat measure, for example. That's like one specific, scenario. But yeah, is that what you're kind of saying, Jen? For example,
Yes, the things that
or
we
at the out,
think
yeah,
need to be part of the procedure to ensure equity in the actual installation and the giving of the heat credit and
right, but not for each individual.
no more as a
Ins-
guideline of the um, yes.
For each, I guess what are we trying to, how could we word it? I guess each category of clean heat measure. As we know, there's a list, in the statute of, uh, by numbered out of, creditable clean heat measures. So for example, for each one of those categories, um, this would need to be filled out as part of that process.
I think that's too broad and there's too much room for specific things to slip past that are not, that wouldn't otherwise apply, but if they're within a very large category, they would be included. I don't think this is too much work to fill out this 1-page, 2-page checkbox piece at the end for any designated delivery agent or obligated party who's installing a clean heat measure to fill out.
I guess, Pike, I'm not sure who would be filling, if only one person is filling it out, that seems to lack the broadness of having, the whole equity advisory group come up with the salient points of any kind of an action that we'd like to see. In the future, if it's just one person from the designated delivery agency or from the heat pump installer or the contractor, that's just their opinion. I don't think we get the wide breadth of knowledge, which we would if we had 10 people filling this out and then having a conversation about it.
Well, in the alternative then, and I'm not ready yet to give up my concern, but in the alternative, perhaps then, that if it's going to be used for more general practice, so all heat pumps and all advanced heat wood systems, et cetera, I think there needs to be a public input period before any of those measures are approved through this rubric.
I would
Do
agree
you
with
think
that.
we get that when we have our meetings, our public meetings?
I'm sorry, what?
I feel
No,
like
Jan, I'm thinking long beyond the time, well past when the EAG no longer meets. So no, not our public meetings, but
Okay.
anytime the powers that be, whether that be the DDA or the PUC, they decide they're going to look into a new hydrogen system. I don't think it's good enough for that one, whether it be the PUC or the DDA, to fill this out without independently of any other kind of public input. And I would just refer back to sections 5 and 6 of this very rubric to say there needs to be accountability and community input.
I think that makes sense. I wonder what our mechanism is for enforcing that. So if we recommend that any future decisions use these rubrics, is that enough to have them be used in the future?
I would think so. It would be eventually written into the rules that are being propagated now.
I think that would be fine. I mean, if we come up with a well-crafted document, it would be beneficial to everybody to have it be used whenever a new action takes place. And I'm thinking not just even measures, but how something is implemented, how funding goes. There's all sorts of actions that come into this that we want to be equitable to all different groups. So I think it would be a good rubric to use in lots of instances.
So I think Dominic alluded to it early on at the beginning that, how does this get used was one of the questions. I think we still need to develop kind of fairly clear instructions. And I don't know or believe that we have time to do that right now, but I think it needs to happen.
Right. And just from my understanding, Pike, and can you just clarify? I guess I want to make sure I'm understanding your perspective. So you're saying that if someone is going out and like installing a new wood stove, for example, that the individual or entity that's installing that would be required to fill out this rubric as part of that install?
If they're seeking clean heat credit, one or more clean heat credits for it, yes.
Okay.
So, for example, if they're putting in an advanced wood heat system, based on where things are going, and they're replacing an old heating system, that doesn't reduce any greenhouse gases. It does reduce particulate matter, perhaps, and other things, but that particular instance, I think, would need to be evaluated. And that's different than, say, if they're installing an advanced wood heating system to replace a kerosene heating system. That would be a different, the rubric scoring would be different. So earlier in our last meeting, we were talking about Vermont Gas pumping in renewable natural gas into their system and seeking credit for it. The way you're proposing it, that would be considered once under this rubric, and then it's a go or no go based on that. That just seems to me, I don't know, just not enough oversight into the system that we're trying to establish.
I see Chris's hand up.
So apologies for being late to the party here. So this looks fantastic so far. And I am stuck a little bit on the delivery agent only because just the way I understood it, and by no means an expert here, is this should be criteria that's defined before the program rolled out. So the agent, when they implement whatever they think qualifies, it either qualifies or it doesn't. There's not a per application or per install process. If they, when they apply or whenever to how they get the credit, it's already predetermined whether that solution is or is not. It's not a per application. That's the way I was kind of picturing this, so that this really is. I was picturing this is more on the policy design feature, and as we roll out that policy, it's not always just defining the gaps, but defining the how we're going to mitigate that. You can't fix everything, but we have to be intentional about how we mitigate any gaps. So if the policy doesn't, I like 1, 2, and 3. I'm stuck on number 4 only because I don't know how to operationalize that in a way for this rubric to work in that situation.
I guess I have a question maybe for you, Dominic. Do you envision that when the plan is finally rolled out, that all types of clean heat measures will be defined, so that, to Pike's question, if we're talking about going from, let's say, kerosene to advanced wood system, will each of those possible measures be spelled out and be approved as a proper clean heat measure?
So my understanding of the legislation and the process to date that is mostly being done on the tag side right now is there is a list of 12 clean heat measures in the law. I could find that reference if need be. Those 12 will be eligible for clean heat measures because the legislature put them in the law that they would be. How many credits the installation of one of those 12 measures would generate is a question that is currently being answered in part by TAG and in part by our emissions analyst consultant. They are taking an equation that essentially asks what is the previous carbon intensity of heating the old system, what is it going to be in the new system, and that difference is going to be the creditable amount. The commission cannot take action to change the eligibility of those 12 measures. That is my personal current understanding. The legislation does allow for additional measures to be approved by the commission and added to that list of 12, and the process by which those are added and accredited have not yet been determined. But that is the point at which this application seems appropriate.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and
Pike, would that work for you, Pike, if there was going to be an additional clean heat measure, as Dominic was saying, to have this applicable for that decision and possibly involved in how many credits each measure gets?
So I would disagree with Dominic's reading of the statute. There are, say, 12 potential eligible measures, but I think each of those eligible measures still needs to be evaluated based on other language in the statute. So if a district heating system creates more greenhouse gases than the thing it replaces, no, it should not be an eligible measure. Not all district heating systems are created equally. So no, not all of them are eligible. There are various types of heat pumps. Some of them do not really, in any significant way, reduce our greenhouse gases. They're designed for warm climates, and they're designed primarily for use for air conditioning, and are used in southern states. That's very different than a cold climate heat pump that's used in Vermont or Maine or New Hampshire. So I think just because it's listed as in that statute does not give it blank approval. It needs further. There's a greenhouse gas emissions that they have to meet per statute, for example.
I see Chris's hand up and then Ben's.
Pike, just how does that tie into the scope of our committee? I'm not trying to shut down your topic. I'm just trying to link it into the scope of what we're here to do today. It sounds like what you have is more of a policy complaint, and how can we, as the equity advisory group, bring that forward through this process? it seems like it's more of a technical advisory
Yeah.
group
So
question.
yeah, I don't know if it's a complaint so far. If the law is implemented as Dominic suggests, where there's no real attention to a measure simply because it's on that list of 12, and there's no further evaluation of it, then yes, I have a policy concern. But I don't think that will ultimately be how this law shapes up. And I think, to answer your question, all eligible measures or potential eligible measures, regardless if they're in that list of 12 or not, need to go through this rubric.
I see
Yep,
Ben's
and
hand.
yes. So yeah, after thinking about this and listening to folks discuss here, I think I see what you're saying, Pike. You know, a wood heat system, for example, that's replacing an older wood heat system that doesn't have a catalytic, doesn't have a catalyst in it, for example, that is going to be a net reduction in particulates. It's proven. So in that case, that's going to be a different outcome than if a wood system is replacing, a fairly clean, modern oil system. You're going to have a different emissions from the wood stove than you did the oil. And so I think what I am hearing is that this needs to be filled out for each essentially iteration of the clean heat measure. There's going to be multiple iterations of each clean heat measure. So there's going to be a wood stove that is installed, an advanced wood heat stove that is going to, replace an older wood stove, that replaces a kerosene system, that replaces a propane system, that replaces an oil system. Each of those iterations is going to have a different outcome because they're different systems that it's offsetting or replacing. So I think I think I do agree with you in that point because it's an important one to consider all the kind of the different options or possibilities of how you know it, these clean heat measures are installed. Um, I think I really still don't think that it needs to be filled out for every single installation, but I think what we can do broadly is say, okay, there's 10 different options or 10 different iterations of a proposed clean heat measure and how it could be installed into a mobile home versus an apartment, etc. And then fill out the rubric kind of essentially at the beginning, like you made the point about district heating systems. If the district heating system is burns X fuel, then it gets this score. If it burns this fuel, it gets this score, etc. So you could essentially fill out this rubric at the beginning of the process, at the outset of the program, and then you would have essentially that score from this rubric recorded and available for reference. So does that make sense? So it's like it wouldn't be every single real world installation or creditable installation. It would be essentially like a library of rubrics score values, that are recorded from all the possible clean heat measure applications. And as new if a clean heat measure has not yet been installed in a home that is offsetting a certain type of fuel that was not, this rubric wasn't filled out for, then at that point, then the rubric would need to be filled out to record that instance or that scenario. Am I making sense there? Do you guys?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that I think that will basically be what our report will be in a lot of ways. I think it will
Mhm.
reflect our answers to these questions for a lot of different scenarios. I think it's also important. I know this is an overused phrase, not to let the perfect get in the way of the good, But I think we have to allow some flexibility because, as you say, Pike, there's lots of different ways that there's going to be remediation and clean heat standards. And given the vast differences between our housing stock and honestly the homeowner's preference, I think it's important to have a lot of say in the homeowner, so that if they're doing something to improve the situation as far as greenhouse gas emissions, they can look and see which would be, more beneficial, but not box somebody into doing something that maybe be unaffordable for them or really may not suit their current standard. A lot of people might prefer to heat with wood than a heat pump. And if that's their home and that's their preferred way of heating, I think they shouldn't be precluded from that, because one way is better than the other if they both are reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
The conversation I'm hearing seems to be approaching two different types of questions, one being measures, and we can take that from a granular or broader sense, and the other that I think Chris was talking more about was policy decisions. Let me scroll down to one of the questions. It's 5.5, so community. Fifth question asks, does the proposed action create local opportunities for livable wage jobs in low and moderate income and historically marginalized, disadvantaged, and underserved Vermonters? From my reading, that sounds like a question better applied to policy, whereas a question like we can find plenty from, affordability 2 is a good example. Does the proposed measure, is the proposed clean heat measure affordable to residents, and/or does the proposed measure offer inclusive financing strategies that prioritize the most income burdened populations? That's a more individual question that at the policy level, we wouldn't exactly answer. There was conversation earlier about having an ability to answer not applicable. And so my question for the group now, seeing also that we have 15 minutes left in this meeting, is how would you propose the commission handle questions that are ambiguous on their applicability or purpose? And how would you suggest entities outside of the commission facing that same question?
I'd love to see this go back for comment, and if there's a red line that folks would like to make to kind of make that more effective or sharp, particularly the POC, that would be great input, because I think the intent of what we're having to communicate is clearly communicated, but in practice, somebody actually using it might want to make that a little more specific. I'd be open to that. I'd really love some public feedback as well. So any interested parties who want to dig into that or make it a little more succinct or specific, I think that's welcome.
Dominic, can you repost the Google Meet, the Google Doc link in the chat? I had to log off and log on for poor reception.
Yep.
There's folks on the call today. Are we going to hear if anybody had comments?
Yes, I had that planned for 12:50, but if the group would like to move that up, that is entirely appropriate.
Yeah, let's hear from the public.
Sure.
All right, we'll take this. Sorry, let me check the rest of the advisory group members. Are you in agreement? I'm seeing general buy-in from Jen, Ben, Chris. Wonderful. Members of the public, now is a great time to go ahead, unmute, introduce yourself, and offer any public feedback on or any public comment on this framework and its usage and applicability. Going once. Going twice. Third time. Alright, if any member of the public was having technical difficulties and is able to join before 1 o'clock, please just introduce yourself to do so. Alright, bringing it back to discussion by this subgroup. I hear a desire for some more feedback, especially on a specific use scenario for this. I think it might be beneficial for this group to revisit these four applications. Are they all still within the scope of what is intended with this? And is there any way that should there be more instructions that go along with each of these applications?
I think they look good, and I guess I broadly agree with Chris that this should be used as a tool for the policy making process. And if, to put it succinctly, I think if this goes into the policy making process, basically good policy, if the policy is written in a way that does ensure equity in the process, then we shouldn't need to use it on a more granular level. So I think this should advise the policy so that we avoid equity issues down the road. So it's kind of like setting the stage. We're building a good foundation from which to then implement this program from. So I just worry about the applicability and what's the quality of data that we're going to get from this rubric if we really bring it down to a granular per measure per installed measure or delivered measure basis. What is the quality of that of that data that we're getting from this? But if it's used in the policymaking process, then it presumably will have beneficial. It'll be beneficial for the equity process down the road. So
Maybe we
I
could
think
add that as a number. I like what you said there, that, offers this rubric to assist to ensure that equity is a
is baked in
integral
essentially.
part of any procedures being promoted under this act.
Right, because broadly what I see our work here is we need to ensure that equity is a key piece of this overall policy. That is what we're here for. That's what we're here to ensure. I think our final report is broadly going to communicate that, but I think this rubric is going to be a key tool to ensure that the policy making process is equitable. That the folks that need to the most at-risk folks in Vermont are taken care of. Initially that it's baked into the process. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I like that
Is that something?
addition at the end.
Dominic, did we answer your questions?
Let's get this in and then ask what the next steps are and see if those can resolve the outstanding
Right.
questions. Therefore, the Equity Advisory Group offers this rubric to those four purposes. And then what I am hearing is, in order to ensure equity is promoted under Act 18, or under we can say Clean Heat Standard Law, by incorporating equity considerations in is policy decision. Ben and Jen, what you were saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
The line I have added in here, is this something that has support from the entire subgroup?
I would no, not yet. in policy and action and eligible action decisions. I think policy decisions is good as it is, but I don't think it is. Yeah, I think this needs to be used more granularly too.
Policy and what, Pike?
Action. We're using the word action for things.
Or procedures.
Um,
Could I get an example of one of those actions? I'm trying to think of like specifically what we're trying to address that's not policy.
All right, so one of the eligible measures is green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is not defined. So we don't really know what it means. We have an inkling. We could probably come up with a definition, but it's not defined in the state. So is hydrogen made from renewable natural gas, which creates a lot of carbon emissions? Is that green hydrogen? And should that be evaluated the same way as hydrogen made from a solar facility where no methane is produced? I think that's more granular than just a policy. And I think each of those scenarios would need to be evaluated independently.
Right. I think I agree with what you're saying, Pike, obviously, because we want to encourage folks to, for example, create hydrogen using renewable energy source. I think that's a great point. But
Well, and I would say no. I would say we want to promote a clean energy source. We're trying to move away from burning things. So there's a phase down of burning even biofuels in this system. There's no phase down for solid wood. So if a hydrogen system is burning wood to create green hydrogen, in this system, it would have zero carbon emissions because Vermont doesn't count the carbon emissions from burning wood. But it would be dirtier than pretty much anything else out there. So I would replace clean with renewable.
okay, fair enough. Yep. So I guess I agree with definitely what you're saying there, because I think that is ultimately, to your point, Chris, I think what Pike just brought up is ultimately a policy decision. Because by us saying, because what the scenario that Pike just brought up does matter, because it's, specifically because you could end up directing the clean heat market to encourage less or sources of energy that are not renewable, which could have unintended consequences. So to that point, Pike, I think I like the
Let me
idea of being
interrupt.
more. Yep.
Let me interrupt and just say, under Dominic's reading of the statute, the PUC would have no decision-making ability regarding green hydrogen because it's an eligible measure in the law, in the statute. So, all right. Sorry to interrupt.
No, okay, yep. Yeah, I was just saying I see where you're going with in the granularity perspective there, but I just think we need to draw a line on how granular of a level we're getting when using this. So I broadly agree that I think it needs to be utilized both for the broader policymaking process as well as these individual cases where we're talking about emerging fuels, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, the specific measure it does need to be broken out because each measure is going to have these little nuances of what fuel it's replacing and how much impact each of those scenarios has. So rather than on each individual like installation or instance, it'll be that category of instance. For example, like I said, is the green hydrogen produced using natural gas or is it produced using solar? Those would be two different categories. And so you could use this rubric for both those categories, but not for each, individual, say, uh, location that hydrogen is, electrolysis is happening and hydrogen is produced. It would just be, we just know that, okay, hydrogen produced using solar is got this, equity score, and hydrogen produced using natural gas got this equity score. And that would kind of that would continue on for every instance where hydrogen is produced using solar. Does that make sense? So it would kind of cover that category.
Right. I'm just worried that they're okay. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. Let me throw
Yep.
out another scenario. Right now, the Vermont Attorney General and the Attorney Generals of 11 other states are suing the EPA for essentially, and it's not stated as directly as I'm stating it, but essentially falsifying emissions data for advanced wood heating systems. Should should the very advanced wood heating systems that the state of Vermont says don't meet the specifications that the EPA gives them, should those be eligible measures? Under Dominic's reading of the law, well, yes, they would be. I have a different conclusion on that.
We are
I
at
think,
12:59. This
yep.
group could vote to extend the meeting by a specified amount of time if it so chooses.
I have to drop off for one.
Yeah, maybe we can continue this at the larger AEG level.
Yeah, I think
I
it's
think
it's
we're
a good
looking for some
discussion for
input.
sure.
I'd like to finalize this, but if you guys want to continue without me, the longer we don't give this to the technical advisory group, I like to operationalize this.
Yeah, that's true. I can stay on another half hour.
Well,
Chelsea,
I think we still need instructions, so I don't think we're going to finish today regardless. But saying that, I also don't think we shouldn't give it to the technical advisory group as a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
Right. All right.
I mean, we're talking about
their
small
work's
things here.
continuing with or without us. So if we want to have a say in their process, we got to get moving. And so it feels like we're there. I feel like policy covers most of what we're talking about. But I got to drop off. I trust that this group will go in the direction that represents the direction of the whole group.
Thanks, Chris.
But thank you. All right. Thanks.
I guess my
Hold on, Jen, real
yeah.
quick. We still have quorum at 3 members. It is 1 o'clock, so if this group would like to continue working, we just need a motion to extend, and we'll take a quick vote on it.
Yeah, I do have time constraints, but I mean, we can kind of wrap up where the thought process we were just on here in the next couple minutes. Is that? I don't think we need a half an hour, but
we could.
Well, yeah, I mean, depending on how policy is defined, I could be willing to agree with that language, but I'm hesitant because I think it.
Extend for 10 minutes.
Sure.
There's a motion to extend for 10 minutes. All those in favor, raise your hand using the raise hand function or on screen.
Aye.
Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The meeting is extended until 1:11 p.m. Eastern.
May I respond to you, Pike?
Sure.
So I think the factors you're bringing up are very important, and to me they go to the broader idea as to the information we have when we fill out the rubric. So if there's certain, I believe the tag is being charged with coming up with how much carbons are emitted, how much carbons would be saved by going from this type of heating to this another type of heating. So I think defining the kind of information we need to fill out this rubric is part of the policy. That just saying something like green hydrogen without more doesn't allow us really to fill out this rubric. But hopefully for every clean heat standard or action, we would have that kind of information from the tag to really make a decision on whether it's equitable or not. And then that would come to us to, to say maybe there is a negative aspect to certain types of green hydrogen. So we would use this rubric to make informed decisions about equity, and that would help us to expand our knowledge about what those different heating measures are.
Right. I think that's good explanation, Jen. Yep.
Well,
I
I
think as
think
it's written now, there's enough to go off of, but um,
um, I think we need language somewhere saying that, for each of the listed eligible measures, they need to go through this rubric.
yeah, I
So
would,
there's not.
I do agree, I agree with that, Pike, and I think that's the discussion you and I were just having. Because obviously each measure is different. There's different iterations and scenarios for each measure. So uh, I think that I agree with that. I just think that doing it, basically essentially at the outset rather than at each individual installation of each measure, creditable
Sure.
measure would be right. Yeah. So that would be a way to kind of, yeah, just ensure equity in like the broader before, the program kicks off, or we're saying that, go ahead and do green hydrogen with, natural gas, this needs to be filled out first to see how it compares to other circumstances or other scenarios of that same measure. So yeah.
Doesn't 3 kind of cover that? So the rubric is used to assist the technical advisory group to evaluate proposed actions through an equity lens. If we wanted to be more specific, we could say such as various heating measures.
Well,
I don't know how much leeway, I don't know how much enforcement we have again. Like we can offer this to TAG, we can offer it as a tool, and we can strongly advise that equity calls for it to be used at each of these different junctures. I think that's what we're saying by offering this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because technical advisor group will be evaluating the individual measure categories for their potential carbon reduction potential, and they are also going to advise on the value of each measure, etc. Um, so from my reading, I feel like that would be we want to basically communicate to the tag that they should use this as part of that process. So I guess the question becomes like in number 3, for example, does the word assist, is that a strong enough language we want it to be required, right? That's what we're talking about
yeah, I
here.
believe so. Yeah.
So yeah, I think instead of assisting them, they need to use it to ensure that this is baked into the process or included in the process.
How about it adopt? Do we give them some agency? So we offer this rubric for adoption by the technical advisory group, and then hopefully they might have a vote in which they would adopt the rubric. So they're actually taking that on themselves rather than us trying to impose something that I'm not
Yep.
sure we have the power to do.
I think that's spot on, Jen. Thank you that's very astute. I agree. Yeah, we should have them adopt it. I think that's a good idea.
Does that edit achieve the discussion just had?
I believe it does. Yeah, that's a good, because then they will essentially be, yeah, they'll adopt it, vote on it under their own terms there, and then once they adopt it, they would be essentially solidifying it into their process. It's the way that I read that as it is now. So yes.
It is 1:08. We could take some quick votes. There are 2 pending edits. There are still some edits that need to be incorporated under direction from the full group, specifically changing clean heat measure to action. We do have a full group meeting tomorrow. So let's divide the question. First, there are 2 edits in front. We still have a quorum. Would we like to take a vote on each of or both of these edits?
These are the edits in
In
uh,
green.
Purple.
on the screen here in purple, or in one on the
Yes.
shared screens in green. Yep.
Yep.
Yes. I agree
Or
with
we
those
could
edits.
also do it by both.
Yeah, I'm willing to adopt those.
Okay.
Me too.
And I just want to clarify, given the second one, we would strike the thing that's currently struck through, so it would read by incorporating equity considerations into every policy decision. Is that what is desired?
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Yep, because I think what we decided here is that a policy, everything we just discussed would be considered a policy decision, or is that's at least our intent. For saying that a creditable measure is from, basically this would be determined or used to determine whether or not hydrogen produced from fossil gas is creditable. That would be a policy decision. So yeah, I think that works.
I ask unanimous consent to accept both of these edits. The first being the addition of the phrase "for adoption by the Technical Advisory Group 2" in the beginning of the third bullet, and the second of which being after the fourth bullet, reading, "in order to ensure equity is promoted under the Clean Heat Standard law by incorporating equity considerations into every policy decision." Any objections?
No.
No.
Nope.
Wonderful. Capture for our minutes. And then I will accept. Alrighty, we have 1 minute, so we might need to extend this one more time. There are, so the change from measure to action still needs to be made, and there's talk
So
about additional.
Dominic, I was tasked with doing that last meeting, and I believe I did a search and replace function as we were early on. So I think that's been taken care of.
Alrighty, I only see 2 instances of measure. Are these intended to be kept?
I did a search and replace for, I forget what, for the full term. So wherever the term measure is, we should review them.
Can we get a motion to extend by another 5 minutes?
I motion to extend by another 5 minutes the meeting.
All in favor? In the opinion
I'm in
of
favor.
the presiding officer, you guys have it. Alrighty, we are good till 16.
Yeah, it looks like the measure, as like you have it highlighted there on the screen, that I think we should keep. But the search and replace function that you did, Pike, appears to have worked.
Got the second one.
Yeah, the The one you have highlighted on the screen, I think, works because it says and or does the proposed measure. So that language to me reads that makes sense.
Alrighty, that sounds good. And then the last piece was more detailed instructions on using this benchmark. Is that something this group is still interested in putting together?
I think we've
I believe
clarified.
it's necessary.
Yeah, I agree, Pike.
Dominic, from your perspective on the PUC, do you think doesn't it need instructions? Or do you think it's good as is?
I would need to, not prepared to say right now, I would need to read with fresh eyes. Having been in this meeting, I feel very prepared, but I want to make sure
Okay.
that it is not
Yeah,
just
I
having
still
been in
think it
this
needs
conversation.
instructions, but I'm not ready to do that today. But I still think we can give it to the tag.
Correct. With the understanding that we might, add further instructions to it and make clarification over time.
Sure.
I think that would be
Given that,
fine from my perspective.
given that I presume the desires for this to contain the full group's endorsement going over to tag, maybe this group recommends to the full group to send it to tag as is with that caveat. Is that accurate?
Correct. I
Yes.
think we could consider this essentially an initial final draft. Yeah, and then have that caveat if we wanted to make changes. But yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Subject to later revision by EJ. Okay. The note I have and will use to introduce this tomorrow is that this subgroup recommends to the full group to send this product to tag as a final draft for their use, subject to later revision by the AG.
You might have a small little
accurate?
editing.
Mhm.
So where it says, therefore, the Equity Advisory Group offers this rubric, you might want to put the colon after rubric and then add to assist so that it reads better for adoption.
Yes, and I consider that clerical
Just
edit.
for English teacher editing.
Mhm. I presume you would like that for all.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. As we have had our public comment session, we are 1 minute away from the extended time. Is there anything else anyone on the subgroup would like to say?
Not at this time.
All righty. Well, this concludes the Equity Frameworks subgroup of the Equity Advisory Committee's meeting today, and we will have this for use for consideration at the full group meeting tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for the time.
Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you.
Ben, thank you, Pike.